Hey everyone, it's Sir Gantlot again. Welcome back to my course in how to use Microsoft Project. In this lesson, lesson 7, we're going to look at how we can change the way the product looks and feels on your desktop. We can change from what the default settings are to maybe better match your personal preferences or maybe more significantly, the preferences of your boss. Another reason that you might want to change the look and feel is to match up with the style that you use in other artifacts that you produce, PowerPoint presentations, Word documents, and others. What we're going to look at in particular is how we can work within the Gantt chart, looking at the bars in the Gantt chart, how we can display, for example, information about what tasks are critical and what the paths leading up to a particular task are and moving on from a particular task. We're going to look at other aspects of changing bar styles. It might be, for example, that we want milestones to look different from the way they are out of the box. We might want to change a specific task or milestone, or we might need to change categories of tasks or milestones. Summary tasks, for example, we might want to look different from the way they appear by default. Well, just as we can change the graphical side of the Gantt chart, we can also modify the text side of the Gantt chart. So we're going to be looking at how we can go to particular cells on the table of the Gantt chart and change the text within that cell, maybe a task name. But also, again, how we can change categories of text for types of task. Maybe we want all of our milestones to have italic text or bolded italic or something of that type. Now, another thing we can do over on the Gantt chart again is we can add grid lines, for example, to show what the current date is, the status date, what the start date of the project is. Not only can we display those, but we can also change the colors and formats of those. There are selected choices available to you in the layout area, where we can decide, for example, whether we want to show the dependencies on the Gantt chart between the bars, or whether we want to suppress those. Lastly, in this lesson, we're going to look at the timeline view. I've mentioned it in several other lessons, but it's this lesson where we're actually going to manipulate it and start working with it. If you do find this course helpful, then certainly any lesson that you see, if you could like it, and consider subscribing to the channel. That way, when I load new videos, you'll know about them, particularly if you click the bell icon to get notified. More significantly, let other people know that the course is out there, and they may well find it as helpful as you do. You might take pity on me and think, well, he's sitting there, he needs caffeine, he needs coffee. Well, you can buy me a coffee, but you would have to do so virtually, and you can do that if you go to buymeacoffee.com/SirGantlot. Those of you who've done that for me, I'm very grateful to you for doing that. To best make use of the course, what I suggest you do, and there are other ways you can approach it, but what I would suggest you do is firstly, make sure that whatever platform you're using, YouTube or any other platform to view the videos, set the quality to the highest possible. As I demonstrate major features and functions, then follow along. I'll try to work at a pace that if you've got your own version of Project open on a separate screen or a different computer, you can follow along hands-on and do the things that I'm doing for you. If I get ahead of you, and that would be my fault, not yours, but if I do get ahead of you, then of course you can pause, rewind, and replay as many times as necessary to see the item that I was demonstrating. Those of you who hold a PMP credential, Project Management Professional, or other credential through the PMI, you can claim PDUs for watching these videos using the category that you see beneath the Submit PDUs item there. Okay, I think at that point we can get rolling with Microsoft Project. So let's take a look at, assume that you've opened up Project. If you go to however you open Project on your desktop, and then you may find that it defaults to this view here, the New Project area. But if not, if it's opened already to a blank project or to a previous project you've been working on, you can go to File and New, and that will bring you to a screen that looks a lot like this one. And I'm going to use one of the available templates for this lesson. again, so that you can revisit if necessary. We've all got a similar starting point. It may be that you don't see all of the templates here. What I would do in that case is where it says search for online templates up here, just search for software development plan, and then this one will become available to you. Because it's already here, I'm going to click to select that that's the one I want to use, and then click again, and I'm going to create a schedule based on that template. And the start date I'm going to choose, I'm going to go 1/1/2022. Backspace over that. I'm going to go 1/1/2022. Having done that, I'm going to click Create. Now, the template is set up so that it opens up with one of the reports displayed here. So we're not going to be looking at that. That's covered in another lesson. Let's click on Details up here. So I'm on Task, go to Details, and then check it one more time. And that will just end up with the Gantt chart in front of you. So let's start working on this to get to a point where I can start demonstrating and you can start practicing some of the formatting options. So the first thing that I will do here is let's expand all of these collapsed tasks here. You'll see that this software project has various components of a software development exercise. But within each of these, if I open up Scope, you'll see that there are multiple other tasks underneath there, subtasks. To show all of the subtasks in a schedule in one fell swoop, you can click on View, where it says Outline, drop that down and choose All Subtasks right there. So that will show all of the subtasks without having to open up each individual section. A couple of other things we'll do. Let's, on the View tab again, where it says Timescale, right in the middle and underneath that Days, let's drop that down and make it weeks. That will just squish in our time frame a little bit on the right. Another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just hover over the divider there between the text and the graphical side. I'm going to click and hold and just bring it over a little bit further. So now let's start looking at some of the things that we can do to modify what we see in front of us. What we're looking at here, of course, is a Gantt chart. And we can tell that we're looking at a Gantt chart because over on the left it says Gantt chart. So it says Gantt chart just there. Don't be fooled by that. That doesn't tell you you're looking at a Gantt chart. That's a quick way to get to the Gantt chart if you're looking at a different view. So let's look at what we've got on the right. We've got summary tasks here, and we've got subtasks. One of the things I said I would show you is how we can see which of those tasks are critical tasks, which are the ones which are actually driving this project to be a 95 3/4 day project. As I scroll down, you'll see that there are a number of areas where we have tasks running in parallel here. So quite evidently, not all of these tasks are driving the duration of the project. Some of them could be happening at any particular time without delaying the project. Of course, if they extend too long, they may become critical. But if we want to see quickly what's critical over here, which tasks are critical tasks, then we can click on the Format tab, and you'll see there's a selection box there, Critical Tasks. Just by clicking that, all of the tasks which are driving the finish date of this project appear in red, and other tasks which are not driving the finish date just retain their original colors. So a number of these tasks are not critical. And what that means, of course, is that they have some available slack before they start pushing out the duration of the project. Now, just to prove what's going on here, there are some tasks that are not critical, but if they increased in duration sufficiently, they would become critical. So let's make that just real quick, a 30-day task. Well, that now becomes a driving critical task for the overall project. And of course, other tasks that were read before maybe are not read now. And this task that was not read before is read because it's now critical. I'm just going to undo that. So up here, there's the undo button and take us back to what we had when we first opened up this schedule. There's a relatively new feature in Microsoft Project that I find quite helpful. Let's select task 52 in this schedule here. Now, if we look upstream from this, if we scroll up and look at tasks leading up to this, there are certain tasks which are upstream in terms of dependency chain, that by following the various links, you would end up getting to task 52 here. But there are other tasks that don't lead up to task 52. So let's see how we can make use of a new feature called the task path right here. I'm on the Format tab again. But before we look at that, let's uncheck critical tasks so that everything is now blue. Again, select task 52, and on the Format tab, drop down Task Path. And let's click Predecessors. And what that does is it highlights for us everything which is upstream in a dependency chain from the task that we've got selected. So these tasks are upstream because they're linked down through here. But there are some other tasks further back which are also linked upstream from us and end up linking to the beginning of task 52 here. But not all of those are what are driving the date of task 52 to be what you see there. Only some of those are. These, for example, are not driving it. It's these tasks up here which are driving it. Now, we can almost see that just by scrolling up and down. But if you had a very complicated schedule, you might want to do one other thing. You might want to say, okay, I want to see everything which is upstream, all predecessors, but I also want to know which ones are driving it and which ones are not. So if I drop down task path again, in addition to predecessors, I also want to see driving predecessors. And what that will do is it will leave these non-driving predecessors yellow as they were before, but these ones up here, which are driving the start date of task 52, are now in orange. So if you like, these are upstream critical tasks. These are tasks which are critical with respect to what is leading to the start date of task 52. So what I'm going to do is undo both of those. Drop down task path and uncheck both predecessors and driving predecessors. Now what we're going to do is look the other way, looking forward from a task. So I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to choose a different one here. Let's go to task 63. I think will work quite well here. So task 63 has a number of tasks which directly follow it, are downstream, and then it has some others which are downstream, but we're actually being driven by some other tasks further up here. So let's see how that works with the task path command. Firstly, drop down task path and go to Successors. And now we've got a nice pale purple lavender color for everything which is linked following task 63. Somewhere downstream, there's a linkage which goes from task 63 and ends up linking to all of those pale lavender tasks down there. But now let's look at this task down here, which is task 70. That is downstream, but it's not being driven to that point by these. It's being driven by some other tasks further up here. So let's do a similar thing to what we did before. Drop down task path and choose driven successors. When we do that, we'll see that only these ones which are directly driven go a slightly darker purple, whereas those ones down there, which are successors but are being driven by other tasks, retain their original pale purple color. So quite a lot of things you can do then just to investigate what tasks are critical either across the project as a whole or with respect to a task that you have selected, either upstream or downstream critical tasks. So let's drop down task path and let's uncheck successors, drop it down again and uncheck driven successors. So there are certain things you can do just by choosing to format on the Format tab to do with critical tasks. Notice a couple of other options. I'm not going to demonstrate every single thing that you can select here, but for example, you could select tasks which, compared to the status date, are late. And you can look at one of my earlier videos to find out how you can analyze a schedule and report progress on it as you go. And we talk about the late tasks filter in that lesson. Let's think of a couple of other things that we might want to change, though. It might be that developing training materials here, let's stay with task 52, is a very important task for maybe for your boss. Maybe the thing that your boss cares about more than anything else is good training materials. Therefore, you might want to highlight that task in some way to draw people's attention to it. So what you could do is hover over that task and right-click and choose Format the Bar. And just for that task that we've got selected here, we could say, all right, so let's choose a different color for it. Let's just keep things simple. Let's just change the color to an orange color and click OK. Now that task now changes to be orange. It's only that single task. There are plenty of other tasks there that have trainers associated with them, but it's only that one task that we've chosen to highlight. What we might choose to do in addition or instead is change categories of bars over here. So I'm just going to undo that we just did. And this time, instead of right-clicking on a single bar, I'm going to right-click in a blank area here. And this time, I'm going to go to Bar Styles. Now, what this calls up for me is an option to modify any type of bar that has the potential to appear in the view that we're looking at. So, for example, we're not looking over here at a network diagram. So therefore, I'm not being offered ways that I can modify a network diagram over here. I'm specifically looking at the Gantt chart, the default Gantt chart, and therefore the things that I can change are items which are on the default Gantt chart. For example, milestones. And you can see over here, there's a milestone, and there are several others. Now, the most common symbol for a milestone is a black diamond, as you see there. And if you look over on the options of what we can change, we could, for example, say, all right, so the shape here is a black diamond by default. Let's change that. And possibly the second most common symbol that I see for milestones is this one here, an upright triangle. And what I might choose to do, well, milestones are pretty significant, so I'm going to change the color. I'm tempted to go with red, but red to a lot of folks implies maybe that something's late or it's been missed. So I'll avoid that and I'll go with purple there. And then when I click OK, you'll see not just this milestone, but any other milestone has changed to represent the new layout and colors that we chose. Notice another thing about the bars that we've got over here. They've got the resource names next to the bars. Now, you might like that, or you might not like seeing the resource names over there. You might think, well, if I need to know what the resources are assigned to that task, I could just pull over the divider on the Gantt chart, and there are the resources there. Or you might think to yourself, well, I could just double-click the task and look at the resources working on that. Or you might look at a completely different view altogether if you're interested in resource loading allocations. You might decide to look at the resource usage view, for example. So it might be that you decide you don't want the names of resources showing next to the bars. So let's right-click in this area here again. Just right-click. Let's go to Bar Styles. And let's go to the standard task here. And this time, instead of changing the colors or anything, what we're going to do is go to text down here on this little tab. And notice to the right, it says resource names. It's going to display the resource names to the right. Well, I could just hit delete there, or I could drop down and look at some of the suggestions that we might want to show on there, like the start date. To the right, and maybe on the left, we could put the start date, on the right, the finish date. At this point, though, I'm just going to delete so that we don't have any text associated with the bars. And we've got a slightly cleaner look and feel at this point. Other things that you might want to change, the way the summary task bars look there. You might want to change that to be something other than that sort of bracket shape. You might want a more solid bar. And at each end, instead of just the little check marks, you might want to have a downward facing triangle. Let's just take a look at that briefly. Let's right click over here, go to bar styles. Let's go to summary. And you'll see that the default settings are here. The only thing I'm going to change is the shape at the start and finish of the summaries. So I'm going to drop that down and choose the downward triangle. I'm going to do the same at the end, downward triangle, and let's see how that looks. And a lot of people prefer that look to the default out of the box. Again, just because I'm changing something doesn't necessarily mean that you will want to make those changes. I'm just showing you the types of things that you could do. Let's undo that to go back to the default. You'll also see that on the Format tab, Microsoft has made available to you a number of different color schemes that you could choose. So, for example, you could scroll down and say, well, I quite like this sort of orangey color scheme. And now the overall theme changes. I'm going to go back to where we were. I don't particularly like the out-of-the-box layout, but I have to say personally, I like some of these even less. So those are some of the many things that you can do to show a different look and feel over on the right. I'm going to come back to the Gantt chart in just a moment. And in a moment, we're going to go and look at the text over here. But one other thing that I've seen quite often people want to do is to change the way that progress is shown on a Gantt bar. So to look at how it's shown by default, let's choose a task. Let's stay with 52. Let's go to the Task tab, and let's just quickly show that this task is 50% complete here. And you'll see the default is that we get a little bar in the middle of the bar to show what the progress is, 50% complete. Well, sometimes, and quite a few occasions actually, I've seen organizations modify that for a couple of reasons. One, it doesn't really jump off the page at you. And secondly, it's not really celebrating much. It's just a little bar. So what I've seen quite frequently is people will right-click over here to change the progress format. So if I just right-click, go to bar styles, and it's a big old list of things that could potentially appear on the Gantt chart. Let's scroll right to the bottom, which is where we'll see progress here. Let's select that one. And what I'm going to do is two things. Change the shape so that it's a big bar, not just a bar in the middle. And I'm going to change the color to be green. I want to be celebrating the fact that we've got progress. So let's choose that green right there and click OK. And now you'll see that instead of a thin black bar in the middle to reflect progress, I've got a thicker, the same size bar as the main bar showing progress. And of course, as more progress comes along, as we get to 75%, then we get closer and further through that bar, closer to the finish of it. Let's undo that one again. And one more time, and one more time. Now let's take a look at how we can modify text over here. Well, you can select any cell. And if you right-click, you've got the basic things you can do with any text. For example, I might want to fill that box with a yellow background. I might want to do that because I want to highlight it to come back and modify it later. There might be something about that, that I want to revisit. You could also change the font in there. So I could right click in there again, and let's change it to bold. But what I'm doing here is a specific cell, pretty much like I did when I chose a single bar over here and right clicked at the one that I highlighted because the boss cares about it. Just as we can choose categories of bars over here, you can choose categories of text to modify. So let's take a look at that. Let's go to the Format tab, go to Text Styles here over on the left. And you'll see it's a little bit hidden away, I think, Item to Change. Well, let's say if we drop down, let's go to change how all of the milestones look in terms of the text. And instead of just being regular font, let's make it bold, and let's go with actually bold italic would be even more obvious. And let's make the text larger, again, just for the milestone. So when I click here, any milestone text is going to have a larger text. We've bolded it, we've made it italics, and that would apply to any of the milestones down here. Again, just because I'm showing you something you could do doesn't mean to say that I'm suggesting that you do it. I'm just showing you some options. If you're not careful, actually, before long, you can lose the impact of your schedule by having too many garish colors, too many different font styles. People just get confused. It's usually better to customize the look of a particular bar or particular test to draw people's attention to it, not to overwhelm them. Let's undo. And let's look at a couple of other things you can change in terms of text. In fact, let's undo a couple of more times to remove this yellow here. So I'll undo there, and there we go. Let's go to Format and Text Styles again. And this time, let's look at critical tasks, the text for critical tasks. Let's say that we want the color of the text to be different from what it is. So instead of automatic color, let's drop that down and make the text red for critical tasks. Let's click OK. And you'll see that all the tasks which were critical or are critical also have red text. So you could do that instead of having the bars red, or both. So on the Format tab, there's critical tasks here, and our bars are red. And wherever the bars are red, the text is red, and vice versa, because they're both triggered by the fact that a task is critical. Let's uncheck the bars over here. And one other thing that you can do with text is I could say, and let's go back to Text Styles, let's stay with critical, and let's leave the red text, but on the background color, let's make that, let's make it a sort of a straw color here. And let's click OK. And then we really are highlighting the items which are critical. I think that's overdoing it. Again, I'm just showing you that that is something that you can do rather than suggesting that you necessarily do it. Let's undo one step right there. Now, other things that you can change in terms of text, if I go back to Text Styles and drop down Item to Change, you'll see various items that you can change down through here. And just take a look sometime and experiment with changing, for example, if I look at that text there, that's a little bit large. Maybe I could bar text to the right. I can make it a little bit smaller than that, or not. Again, it's up to you. Okay, I'm just going to exit out of there. I mentioned the fact that we can modify not just what's appearing over here, but we can also modify what lines we see showing. There's a dotted line coming down here, for example, and that's representing the finish date of the project. If I scroll over to the left here, you'll see there's another dotted line that represents the start of the project. Other things we can do is have a date representing today or the status date. Now, by default, project usually shows today's date as a green vertical line. But let's say that I'm currently statusing this project for how things were going at the end of last week. So let's go to let's set that up, the status date. Let's go to project information here. And you'll see that the current date is showing as, for me, 3/1 of 22. Let's go back to the status date. I'm going to drop that down and make it the end of last week, the 28th of February, 2022, and click OK. And you'll notice that out of the box, Project doesn't show you a line for the status date. And again, out of the box, the start date is just a simple dotted line. Today's date is green. And over on the further over to the right, the finish date, again, was a simple dotted line. So let's see how we can change some of those. Let's go to the Format tab up here. And over to the left, near where we were looking at text styles, let's look at Gridlines. And click Gridlines again. And let's say that we want to actually display our status date. So let's click Status Date. And you'll see right now it's not showing anything. So let's make it look like a double dotted dashed line there rather. And let's make the color a nice red color. Let's click OK. And then you'll see that our status date should have appeared. It didn't. So let's do an instant debug, find out why that didn't happen. Let's go back to Gridlines. Let's go to the status date again. And actually, let's drop it down here. Let's drop the, interesting. Okay, so the status date's not appearing there. Let's double check with project information to make sure that the status date was selected. That's very interesting. Maybe we've got a bug in project right there. Let's just change the view just a moment. Let's make the time scale days and see if that made it appear for us. Okay, still not seeing the status date. We'll have to dig into that in a moment. Let's change the format of today's date. So let's go to Format here. Let's go to Gridlines, Gridlines again. Let's go to the today's date, which will be the current date right here. And we've got the type is showing as a single line, as you can see over here, and green. So let's make that red and click OK. And let's change that to red. Let's change the project start line over here to something other than dots that you see there. Let's go to Gridlines again and Gridlines. And let's go to the project start. And let's make it a little bit more visible. Let's go to the dashed line here again and make the color red and click OK. And then we've got the start of the project is right here. So I've changed a couple of the grid lines, vertical grid lines, and we'll come back in a moment and see what's happened to that darn status date that didn't appear. I'll have to debug that and see where that's gone to. We changed today's date to be red as well. Now, other things that we can do on the grid lines include the ability to have lines across to maybe just make it easier for your eye to follow across from the text to a particular bar. For example, a bar over here, you might, especially if you've got a big monitor and a wide display, it might be hard for your eye to just follow over and get the right bar. So let's see what we could do there. Let's go to grid lines again. Let's go to grid lines and let's go to Gantt rows here. So let's go to Gantt rows. Let's drop that down and have a dashed line of that type. Let's go with the color. Let's go with, we'll change it to, we'll keep it black there, and we'll do it every second bar and click OK. And what that's done for us is it's put in some eye aids, if you like, ways in which we can just look over and find where the various tasks are that belong with our various text cells over here. It makes it a little bit easier. It might be, for example, that you plot this on plotter size and stick it on the wall of your project office. And before long, you get a whole lot of smudges on there where people have been sort of dragging their finger from a bar from text for a bar over to the bar. Maybe they've been having conversations and discussions. Before long, you get a lot of mess on your Gantt chart. Whereas if you just had these dotted lines showing, it might reduce the need for that to happen. And of course, you saw that I put them in to be intervals of 2. You could have them at intervals of 1 if you wanted to, or don't have them at all. In fact, I don't particularly like them, so I'm going to make them go away. Another thing you can do in the format area is to go to this tab here, which says Layout. And that tab shows you the basic layout of the Gantt chart and how the bars look. Now you can change things like the date formats, the height of the bars. But one of the things I've seen happen more than others is people decide that maybe this spaghetti of dependencies can get a bit overwhelming, especially if you've zoomed out. So let's go to View. Let's close out of that. Let's go to View. And let's show the timescale in weeks, like we've been looking at it a couple of times. And it can be before long that you've got an awful lot of dependencies reflected with bars and links between the bars that can sort of detract a little bit, make it a little bit harder to follow. And bear in mind, of course, that your predecessors are listed. So let's pull that back over. Let's go back to our Format tab and the Layout option. Over here, Layout. And let's just not show any dependencies at all. Now, the dependencies still exist. It's just that we've chosen not to display them. Another option within the layout there with regard to dependencies is, by default, dependencies look like this one here. In other words, a bar has its link coming in at the top left corner of the bar. And if there's more than one, then gradually they move along a little bit here. And it's almost like the dependency looks like it's coming in part way into a task, almost as if there's a lag there. But that's not the case. It's just the convention for that format. What sometimes people do instead is they choose on the Layout tab, they choose this here, so that dependencies always feed in to the beginning of the task. And therefore you get those little squiggly lines. That's not my preference. And the reason for that is it's not quite as easy to spot a situation where you have an overlap of tasks, as we see here, because all of them have that little wiggle to them. Whereas if I go back to my Layout tab and choose this one and click OK, now that catches my eye a little bit more because it has that shape to it, which is different from the other dependencies. Okay, that's as far as I wanted to go with showing the various things that we can manipulate on the Gantt area. We looked at grid lines, we looked at text styles, and we looked at the layout. In each of those areas, there are multiple other options for you. And I suggest you just get in there and start experimenting and use potentially one of the templates as a starting point. And in fact, because I've made quite a lot of changes to this one, I'm going to start with a new template. So this schedule, I'm going to close down at this point. And I don't need to save that one. I'm going to go to File and New and open up a new software development template. And I'm going to hit Create. I'll just set a default to today's date. Doesn't matter what that is for you. It's almost certainly not going to be the same today as my today is right now. And to just suppress this report at the top, I'm going to click Details and then again Details, so that all I've got showing right now is the regular Gantt chart. Something I think is a little bit strange here is this is a template, right? This is a template for a software development project. But notice that in putting the template together, what's been chosen as the final milestone is software development template complete. Well, if I'm going to use this for a project, it's going to be the project that's going to be complete at that point, not a template. So I'm just going to type that in as software development project complete. I'm going to do some of the things I did previously. I'm going to pull the divider over. I'm going to change the time scale to be weeks. So I'm going to go to View, change the time scale to be weeks. It's already defaulted to weeks. That's fine. And I'm going to expand everything. So I'm going to choose on the View tab. I'm going to go to Outline, and I'm going to say All Subtasks. So now let's look at the timeline view. Because this is a template, the timeline has been pre-populated with certain tasks selected from down below here. So let's take those out. But firstly, let's take a look at what the timeline looks like. On the View tab, click on Timeline up here. And the way this template has been put together, various tasks from down below here have been selected for display in this timeline at the top. Now, the whole purpose of a timeline is to be crisp and very selective in what appears within it. And I would suggest that that has not been achieved here. This is actually a little bit hard to work out what's going on. So let's do a couple of things. Let's select in the top here, select one of those items, and then Control select all the others. I'm going along here. I've got my finger on the Control key, and I'm just clicking on these items, including this down at the bottom here. And when I've done all of that, I'm just going to right click on one of these and say remove from timeline. And that basically takes everything out of the timeline. We now have nothing in the timeline. So what we're going to do is we're going to find some significant tasks down in the schedule at the bottom that we would like to display in the timeline because they're significant in their own right. So let's choose, for example, Scope Complete. So let's select this task here, Scope Complete. It's a milestone. And what I'm going to do is right click on it and say Add to Timeline, just down here. Now we're going to make the timeline look a little bit better soon. But let's go and find another task here. And let's go to let's choose Draft Preliminary Software Specifications. That's task 9. I'm going to right click on that. I'm going to say Add to Timeline. Let's scroll down a little bit further. Let's choose Design Complete, task 24, right click and Add to Timeline. And then what I'm going to do is developing code is pretty important. So I'm going to right click on Develop Code, task 29, add that to the timeline. And I'm going to come down to the end of testing. Unit testing. Let's just right click on there and say add to timeline. Okay, so what I've got now is just a little selection of tasks that I want to appear in that timeline. I'm just going to move the time frame over a little bit so that I see all of the tasks that I chose there. Now, at first glance, that's not particularly attractive, but what I'm going to do is start modifying it because just as we can format the Gantt chart, we can also format the timeline. So select the timeline area and then select Format. Now notice, if I've got Format selected up here and the timeline is the active panel, I have different things showing than if I, for example, select the bottom part here, the Gantt chart. I'm still on Format, but there are different things. These are what we looked at before. Let's just select the timeline to make that the active panel. Now you might have noticed when I selected this task here, Draft Preliminary Software Specifications, the title was too long to fit in the area that I've chosen for it. Now I could zoom out further, I guess, or zoom in further, but then I'd have a way wide timeline. Instead, what I'm going to do is select that task there and then go up to the top and say Display as a Callout. And just for consistency, I'm going to do that with this task as well. I don't necessarily need to, if you think about it, because it does fit. But nevertheless, I'm going to do that. So I'm going to select that task and display as callout. And as soon as I do that, you'll see that the amount of space occupied by this timeline bar here becomes a little bit less. But things are a bit squashed. So I'm going to pull down. I'm going to click the title, Scope, Complete, and just pull it down further. The same with Design Complete. The same with Unit Testing Complete. I'm going to pull that down here. With these task names, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to select one. I'm going to raise it a bit higher here. And the same with this one. Now, let's just take a look at what we've got in front of us. If you look here, you'll see that we've got Scope Complete with a date, Design Complete with a date, and the tasks have dates showing their start and finish. So therefore, it's questionable to me why I would even want these dates across here, especially as Project randomly selects, and there's no predictable way in which it will do this, selects the interval at which it's going to set up these periods here. There's no way that you can be very specific about what these intervals are going to be. You just have to hope that Project chooses something reasonable, and it usually doesn't. And because of that, I'm going to suppress this date time scale across here because I don't need it because they're on these various tasks anyway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose on the Format tab, Detailed Timeline. Actually, let me just do that again. Sorry, click it one time. I'm going to go to Date Format. I beg your pardon. I'm going to go to Date Format. And at the very bottom, I'm going to uncheck where it says Timescale. Now, we don't have that distracting set of check marks across there. One other thing I'm going to do is I like on my timelines to select the bar, and then I like to fill it with a color. The one I typically use is this blue here. No particular reason. And don't use that color if you don't want to, but I tend to use that one. I'm going to pull my time scale over a little bit now to cover the full extent of the project. So just pull it a little bit further so I get the finish as well. Let me just pull over here. There we go. Okay, so I scroll. What I was doing there, in case you didn't catch it, I was scrolling a little bit at the bottom here to get the full length of the timeline there. So to me, I've now got something which is easy to display. And what you can do with the timeline is you can just right-click on it and say, copy timeline for presentation. And then you could paste this little picture here directly into a PowerPoint slide. You could paste it into a Word document if you were putting together a little analysis document or a proposal of some form. And it's neat, tidy, and only the things that you want to be included are included. Now, it might be that, for example, you use this as a weekly briefing chart, and that's good because when things change down here, they automatically update in the timeline. You don't have to keep updating them in two places. To show what I mean by that, let's take this unit testing complete task 41. It's 6/3 is its finish date up there, 6/3 down here. I'm just going to change that date. Now, I know if you've looked at my other videos, I've warned you against just changing dates rather than using logic to push dates to where they need to be. But I'm just going to do that now anyway, simply so that we can see the impact of changing something in the schedule. Let's make it go instead of 6/3, let's make it push out to April the 5th here. And I'm going to keep the link and say, whoops, didn't mean to do that. Let's go to April the 5th again. Just bear with me. April the 5th. And I'm going to remove the link and move it. So let's do that. And now it's moved to a different date altogether. Right, it's moved back into April. And let's undo that. As soon as you change something down here, it will change higher up. And in fact, I could just push it a little bit later. So let's push it to the 14th. And I'm going to move it and keep the link. and then you'll see that it moves on the time frame and it moves down here. You'll notice, by the way, in both cases, when I selected a date here, it created a start note earlier than constraint, which is something I cautioned against in an earlier video. Let's just undo again. Now, just as you can modify the text for particular bars down in the Gantt chart, or all bars of a particular type, you can do a similar thing in the timeline. So if I go to Format, have the timeline selected, go to Format, go to Text Styles over here, and under Item to Change, I could say, for example, I want to change the milestone dates, just the dates of milestones, and maybe I just want them to be a little bit more obvious than they are over here. So maybe I'm just going to bold them. And if I click Bold and OK, then all of my milestone dates are now bolded. So that's about as far as I want to go with the timeline. It is possible to have more than one timeline. You could copy timeline via the organizer, or even through here, you could copy it, and you could have a time scale, a time frame, a timeline with milestones your boss cares about. You could have a timeline that shows different items that a vendor is performing for you, for example, and you could just select them, copy them, paste them into a PowerPoint presentation, and brief accordingly. So it can be quite a powerful feature. My main caution would be is don't overdo things. Don't have too many things in the timeline. Otherwise, you may as well just be filtering the Gantt chart and showing that. I mentioned earlier, just before we finish this, that people will often brief on a weekly or monthly basis key things about their project, and they'll use the timeline to do that. In which case, having today's date as it sort of slowly moves across might be helpful. However, if you're just putting this together and it's going to be pasted into a proposal or a sales pitch or something of that type, having today showing there may not be the most helpful thing. So let's drop down date format, and at the bottom just uncheck today, and it just suppresses it. It doesn't stop today being today or change anything in the project. It just chooses not to display it up there. Okay, so that's all that I wanted to cover in the session on formatting. So let's just remind you what we did look at. We looked at how we can look at the critical path, how we can show critical tasks. Bear in mind, by the way, you could have more than one critical path, but you can show which tasks are critical very quickly. You can also show critical tasks leading to a task in the schedule, a particular task, the upstream, predecessors and driving predecessors. We can also look downstream, and both of those are done using that task path command. We looked at how we can modify bars, both individual bars and bars matching a particular category. And we did a similar thing with text, how we can change cells to just draw attention to what those cells are telling you, or how we can change the text for particular types of tasks, for milestones, for example, or summary tasks. We did some work with Gridlines. We looked at how we can change the format of the start date for the project grid line, and also for the finish date. And we looked at how we could change today's date. We looked at layout options, how we can change whether or not we see the logic, or on the Gantt chart, the logic connectors, the dependency connectors, whether or not we could see the resource names on there. And we also just finished off by looking at the timeline. So hopefully that was helpful information for you. Again, if you did find any of that helpful, then just like the lesson, like the video, subscribe to the channel, set up notifications, and all the other things that all the YouTube presenters and other presenters ask you to do. If you do feel like buying me a coffee, you can do that virtually via buymeacoffee.com. The main thing is, though, I'm very grateful that you have watched this video. If you did gain information from it, it is one of a series of lessons, 11 lessons altogether. And I've alluded to some of the other lessons by telling you that some of the things that happened, for example, when we were looking at modifying dates and seeing how that just went in and set start no earlier than dependency. Well, you could check that out in adding and working with project tasks, lesson 2. Either way, do feel free to browse around the various lessons that I've got for you. And hopefully it was helpful to you, and hopefully will be for others that you tell about the course as well. So thanks for your attention. Really enjoyed having you listen to me.